The buzzer has sounded for the trade deadline, and the Panthers make another splash right at the buzzer.
While the Chicago Blackhawks get their new franchise goaltender, but hang on to Ryan Donato.
All this and more on this trade deadline edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast and Locked On Blackhawks.
You're Locked On Blackhawks, your daily podcast on the Chicago Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into this trade deadline special of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast and Locked On Chicago Blackhawks podcast. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. Thank you for making both of our Locked On podcasts your first listen of the day. For everyone on the Blackhawks feed, my name is Armando Velez, the host of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast from the Hockey News, and grateful to be here in person in Florida with the host of Locked On Blackhawks, Jack Bushman, the host and from Talking Hockey. Great that you are here in Florida to not only talk everything from the trade deadline, but also you are here to cover some golf here. So welcome to Florida, my friend.
Well, first, let me just say thank you very much for having me for a couple of days, Armando, and showing me around the Orlando area, which I haven't been back to since I was like 10 years old, going to the theme parks and everything. So it's been nice to kind of get to see the town and whatnot. As you referenced here, covering a cool golf tournament at Bay Hill. And, you know, our team's making a trade during the week as well, involving Seth Jones and Spencer Knight. Couldn't have come with better timing, my friend. So thank you again for having me, and excited to be here to do this crossover in person, which I've never done with another Locked On host. So super excited for it today, Armando.
Yeah. So we also had the opportunity to introduce you to some Cuban food from Vicky's Bakery here. And later on, I'll be introducing you to a Mountain Mount from Miller's Ale House, something that's very iconic in the Southeast. But yes, you mentioned it. If you're watching us on the YouTube, make sure to press that like button and also subscribe to our individual podcasts. If you're watching, you'll see the backdrop of the jerseys behind us of Florida Panthers captain and now Florida Panthers defenseman Seth Jones. So let's talk about that trade and just your reaction to it. Seth Jones has now played 2 games with the Florida Panthers. And it is honestly now it's looking great for Seth Jones, not being asked to do too much based on the situation for Chicago when they first traded. And obviously it was an old regime with Stan Bowman in the mix. And now there was a transition period with everything and also some off the ice issues for Chicago. And then Seth Jones was there through it all. And now a few years in, you think that there would be a change in direction for them. But now Seth Jones has been traded, and it costs for the Panthers Spencer Knight and a first-round pick in 2027. But for the Panthers side of things, I love the trade. It helps the Panthers for their win now, and really it helps on the Chicago Blackhawks side of things, and for Spencer Knight personally, it helps them as a path to get to as the main starter a lot closer. Just like Yaroslav Askarov in San Jose.
Yes. Very similar. And I think as I broke it down on my show, the very first time I talked about it, Armando, I really do think this is a trade that could work well for both sides. But I was very surprised that the Blackhawks got the value that they did, considering Seth Jones's leverage type of situation, right? With that contract, $9.5 million AAV. Not many teams before the salary cap starts going up these next few seasons can realistically afford that. Seth Jones had come out publicly kind of bashing the Blackhawks for the first time in his tenure, and obviously was just sick of all the losing going on. As you referenced, he was acquired when Stan Bowman was still the general manager of this team. The identity of the Blackhawks at that point in time was they weren't going back into a full-scale rebuild. I mean, basically the trade for Seth Jones signaled that. So he didn't really sign up for that. As you mentioned, a lot of off the ice issues for the Blackhawks, a lot of losing on the ice as well. And I think the unfair thing about Seth Jones in this entire situation is a lot of Blackhawks fans have just only graded him on his contract. And I think they haven't truly understood how poor of a situation it's been for Seth and the lack of talent he's had around him. Now, listen, Armando, Seth is probably not the number one defenseman that he was being paid to be here in Chicago at $9.5 million. But that doesn't mean he's not a good player. He's a very special talent, 6'4", a big right-handed defenseman, which are always attractive to other NHL clubs. And he plays a transition style game where a team like the Florida Panthers, who has the puck a lot, it makes a lot of sense for him to be lugging the mail up the ice, can play and quarterback the power play for the Panthers as well. So I think Florida is getting a really solid player in Seth Jones. Probably a lot of my viewers on the Locked On Blackhawks podcast know me as somewhat of a Seth Jones defender over these last few years, because I really thought it was important to come on my show and be like, this guy is a good hockey player. And if he was paid, $6.5, $7 million, I think there would be a total different narrative around him. So Florida, I think, is really getting a very good piece in this trade to go and bolster that blue line on the right-hand side. And as you talked about too, Seth isn't going to be asked to do everything there. He's going to be asked to play his role. And I think that will be a real big fresh of breath air for him. And the Blackhawks side of things, they get their franchise goaltender. They have some good goalies in the prospect pool, and Drew Comesso, who was a former second-round pick, and Adam Guyan, who's kind of struggled in his freshman campaign in college, but he was the first goaltender off the board in the 2023 draft as well. But make no mistake about it, Armando, none of them are in that conversation with Spencer Knight. I think the Blackhawks, like I said, got more value than I originally anticipated, but I do think the Florida Panthers, in win-now mode, got a piece that helps them win right here, right now. And when you have that window open, Armando, you want to capitalize on it. And I think the Panthers did just that.
And speaking of capitalizing for the Florida Panthers, I mean, using their $8.7 million in cap space for getting Vitek Vanacek recently as their backup goaltender in a trade for them, for the San Jose Sharks, for Patrick Giles, who was his ceiling for me was going to be a fourth line checking role for him, and then getting a third goaltender in the system in Kaapo Kähkönen, and then Nico Sturm, who I broke down on yesterday's show, is that Kevin Stenlund replacement for them. And at the buzzer, the big trade that the Florida Panthers made, and I even said it, even going into the day, that I would be content with what the Florida Panthers would do coming into this one at $4.1 million left on the day. And they made the trade at the buzzer for Bruins captain Brad Marchand. The Panthers eliminated the Bruins 2 years in a row. The 2023 season, 130-something points for them, and then down 3-1, and then taking them to a game 7 right before Carter Verhaeghe scored that game winner, and then beating them in the very next year in the second round in 6 games. Gustav Forsling scores in the last minute of the game, former Blackhawk Gustav Forsling.
Bring it up. Don't bring it up.
And
still scarred.
And then the Panthers, to think that where the Bruins were going, they signed Elias Lindholm and Nikita Zadorov. And then what's going to be happening with their pieces in Brad Marchand? Plays with Sam Bennett, obviously gets the punch to the face from him, and then plays in the Four Nations on the same line. Who knows what kind of conversation was between them during the Four Nations for them to possibly team up together. And now he's a Florida Panther. As of right now, what we know is a conditional 2027 second round pick for a chance to be a 2028 first round pick. So right now the Panthers, it looks like that they now only have their 27 first round pick. But I'm thinking, if Matthew Tkachuk is healthy enough for game 1 of the playoffs, him, Sam Bennett, Brad Marchand, that's a line full of, I'm gonna say the clean version of this, a-holes on this on that line for them if it happens to work out that way, and just rats for them. And I do have my rat here for people on my feed. So really, it's just been an outstanding trade for the Florida Panthers, and just bolstering up their lineup once again, and just saying, we don't want to leave any doubt. We want to make sure that we have everything at our disposal to go for another run. And you experienced this, Jack, with those 3 Stanley Cups for the Chicago Blackhawks. And even before Paul Maurice came into the mix, there's a lot of comparison with the Blackhawks and the Panthers are tied for a long time. A lot of correlations. Dale Talon, Joel Quenneville, even though he's no longer with the organization anymore. But talk to my listeners just about the sense of going for it, and how fans could yes, they get attached to guys, but talk about from your perspective of when the Chicago Blackhawks were going for for it big at deadlines over their 6-year run of 3 championships.
Yeah, and a lot of those deadline moves that they made, Armando, were ones that got them over the hurdle. And it kind of feels similar to the moves that the Florida Panthers have made here today. And to all the Florida Panthers fans watching, I'm sure it was not easy to trade away a player like Spencer Knight, as you've kind of told me in side conversations as I've been here. And when we were messaging last week when the trade went down, you were telling me a lot of Florida Panthers fans were having a hard time separating themselves from Spencer Knight, because when they drafted him 13th overall, they thought he was going to be the goalie of the future. I mean, the kid's still only 23 years old. I was telling you earlier, he's quietly younger than Dustin Wolf, who's up for the Calder this year as NHL Rookie of the Year. So yes, it's tough. It's tough, Florida Panthers fans. And on the Blackhawks side of things, during those days, they really didn't trade all that many like prospects who are at the same level as Spencer Knight, but they did have to get rid of numerous first-round draft picks. And I know that's something that you Florida Panthers fans can certainly relate to, with not a whole lot of draft picks in the system moving forward. But guess what? That's the price of winning. And the window for opportunity in the NHL, it's so hard to win in this league. And we're seeing it as Blackhawks fans. After it's over, it's so hard to get back. When you're in that winning mode, Mondo, you think it's going to happen year after year after year. And that's just not a reality in this league. So you truly got to appreciate when you do have that window opportunity open once again. And unfortunately, a result of winning is you're going to have to trade away some high-level prospects. You're going to have to trade away some high draft picks to help this team get over that hurdle. And the couple of pieces that the Florida Panthers got today, I think it's going to make it a little easier for Panther fans to swallow, trading away yet another potential first-round pick and a high-level goaltender in Spencer Knight.
Yeah, so it's just been a whirlwind of emotions, just thinking that they have a chance to do it again, and to think that Brad Marchand, we don't know how much is going to be retained by the Boston Bruins, as someone who's making just over $6 million. The Panthers had 4.1. So, and the thing is, it doesn't hurt the Panthers' future, which I never expected it to be a big haul that they were going to trade for him, for someone who's on the older side. He's currently hurt right now. He's week to week. And the thing is, the Panthers play the Bruins next Tuesday for the start of a 6-game road trip out east for them. So that is going to be, that's going to be spicy, as also the Bruins have gone into a little bit of a retool, trading Brandon Carlo to the Toronto Maple Leafs. Charlie McAvoy is going to be out for a good period of time after what happened in Four Nations. So hope that he's okay. So the Panthers, man, to think that they might have broken the Boston Bruins after those 2 playoff series as well. That's good. That must be so tough for Bruins fans to swallow. But we're going to transition over to segment number 2, where we're going to discuss what's the latest with the Chicago Blackhawks and what they've done at the trade deadline, what's happened today, and what moves that they didn't make for them. And we're going to discuss more of winners and losers for the trade deadline. We're going to discuss this more on this trade deadline special of the Locked On Florida Panthers and Locked On Chicago Blackhawks. But first, we're going to tell you guys all about FanDuel. And when the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started. And there's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game. So even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in on the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. I love using the FanDuel live betting feature because it keeps every moment of the game exciting. Whether I'm backing my team for a late-game rally or picking up a player to hit a clutch 3, I never feel like I'm missing my chance. Plus, the app is easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. Back on this trade deadline special here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast and Locked On Blackhawks, here with Jack Bushman of Locked On Blackhawks. Thank you once again for making both of our podcasts your first listen of the day. So on the Chicago side of things, talk about what the Chicago Blackhawks did or what they didn't do for this trade deadline for them.
Yeah, it was kind of an interesting deadline day. Not really the one that I expected, Armando. I really believed that Ryan Donato was going to get dealt. A guy who's only making $2 million this year on an expiring contract, has 23 goals on the season. I believe 20 have come in the even strength variety. Like, he's been the best player on the Chicago Blackhawks all year long, and also has the versatility to play both the center and the wing spot. Now, yes, this is probably an outlier type of season for Ryan Donato, but considering this was a seller's market, considering there wasn't all that many intriguing pieces available on the table until, Brad Marchand became available at the last second. I guess Boston decided to sell in the final 5 minutes of the trade deadline. But I really expected Ryan Donato to get dealt and the Blackhawks to capitalize on this opportunity with it being a seller's market. And now they have Donato for the final 20 games of the season. And I know he's been playing well and the team's kind of been faring better. And the Blackhawks do like to see that down the stretch of the season, but they could have gotten some assets here, some really good ones potentially based on the trades that we were seeing go down. And if they do want to bring Ryan Donato back in the offseason, which again, he's an unrestricted free agent, so we don't even know if he really wants to do that, but you're probably going to have to pay a premium on a guy who, again, is probably having an outlier type of season and is going to turn 29 next year. So I really didn't like the decision by general manager Kyle Davidson for the Blackhawks to keep Ryan Donato, but I did like the other pair of moves that they made. The most noteworthy one was Peter Mrazek and Craig Smith being traded to the Detroit Red Wings in exchange for Joe Veleno. Veleno is the former 30th overall pick back in 2018. I don't really know if he's going to be a puzzle piece here in Chicago. He's kind of been on the NHL stage for 5 years and is underwhelmed as a first-round pick. But more so than that, the Blackhawks got Peter Mrazek off of their books. And with getting Spencer Knight, that left them with a 3 NHL goaltender type of situation. And Mrazek has a $4.25 million cap hit through the end of next season. So it felt like a real conundrum for the Blackhawks. Not to mention, they have Laurent Brossoit, who hasn't even played a game this season, hasn't even been on the ice for practice. It's been a real nightmare. So 4 NHL goalies for the Blackhawks. Absolutely had to give Peter Mrazek off of their books, but that was going to be easier said than done, considering he's 32 years old and he also has like a 880 save percentage since December. It has not been very good. So to package him with Craig Smith and actually get something in return, like Joe Veleno, again, I mentioned it's probably a low possibility he's a puzzle piece here in Chicago, but there is still a chance. I thought for the Blackhawks to move Peter Mrazek, Mondo, they were going to have to give up an asset along with him, and a legitimate asset, not no offense to Craig Smith, but I thought they were going to have to give up, maybe a second or a third round pick because Mrazek's older, has groin problems, and his numbers have been sliding. So I thought that was a phenomenal deal for the Blackhawks. The Shea Weber one was a little weird. Obviously, he's retired, but his contract is going to help them reach that salary cap floor next season now that Seth Jones obviously is off of their books. They get Victor Soderstrom, the former 11th overall pick for the Arizona Coyotes, now, of course, the Utah Hockey Club. He's actually playing over in Sweden right now, not even playing over in North America. So Utah had kind of quit on him. So the Blackhawks get an opportunity to buy low on a guy like that. Not really much to be made about that deal. But I thought it was an all right trade deadline from the Blackhawks, but it could have been amazing, I think, if they traded Ryan Donato. Even if you have to, bite your tongue a little bit and trade him for a second, that was kind of the expectation anyways. Yes, it would be disappointing in this market, but now, I really don't want to overpay for Ryan Donato in the offseason, and if we don't, then we're going to lose him for nothing. So a little bit confusing, but I did like the Peter Mrazek and Craig Smith trade to Detroit.
Yeah, so looking at Peter Mrazek's contract of 4.25 with that trade, I mean, it helps the Detroit Red Wings on the other side of things at least get some continuity in goal, just under $7 million with Alex Lyon, former Panther Alex Lyon. His contract is expiring this season. And, you mentioned the Shea Weber contract, getting him to the floor, because I was wondering if the Chicago Blackhawks were probably going to be on Mikko Rantanen or Mitch Marner, which Mikko Rantanen ended up being traded to the Dallas Stars and extended 8 years, $12 million for him. And there was a little bit of of reports whether he was going to once 13, whether they were going to give him that. And now, so this leaves the Blackhawks into, once again, still in a position to big game hunt this offseason to help Connor Bedard there. But, still a lot of questions for them, but still a lot of assets that they could trade for guys under contract. So they do still have that ammunition. But speaking of the Detroit Red Wings, oh my goodness, when they traded Jake Wallman to the San Jose Sharks, they didn't really give much of a return to him, and then San Jose is able to flip him to Edmonton for a first round pick. So that is one of my winners for the trade deadline. San Jose is one of them. Edmonton got their blue line there. Colorado also made over their team from Mikko Rantanen. They used Mikko Rantanen's money to get more depth around them for Marty Necas. There's Ryan Lindgren is also part of the mix for the Colorado Avalanche there. They were able to get Brock Nelson and able to ship Casey Middlestat out. I thought that Casey Middlestat was going to be the third line center for the Avalanche. Talking about that, and then he gets traded.
Figuring out the center position.
I'm like, okay. I'm wondering how they're going to navigate everything. I had to look at their daily faceoff. But that Colorado is a winner. Edmonton is one. The Winnipeg Jets, they didn't change too much of their identity. And of course the Dallas Stars. If the Dallas Stars and the Florida Panthers meet in the Stanley Cup final, make those games in Finland again, just like they did in the Global Series.
Helsinki, here we come.
Yeah. So who are your winners in the trade deadline?
I got 3 winners for this year's deadline. Number 1, no cap. Not even because I'm on the show. It has to be the Florida Panthers, in my opinion, man. Like the reasons I talked about when I first came on here. That window of opportunity, you feel like it's going to happen year in and year out, but it doesn't happen that way in this game. And we know the Panthers, even before these trades, had a legitimate opportunity to run it back. And now you get Seth Jones to bolster that blue line. And again, put him in a role where he'll be comfortable. He can thrive. And then also getting Brad Marchand. I mean, thinking about having Sam Bennett, Matthew Tkachuk, and Brad Marchand, maybe not even on the same line, but just all in the forward group playing Stanley Cup playoff hockey. Like, that's where those guys and the way they play absolutely thrive. So, yeah, maybe it was more draft picks traded away for Florida and getting rid of Spencer Knight, but I really think they hit a home run in capitalizing on this opportunity. So I had the Florida Panthers definitely as a winner. I also think the Dallas Stars are a winner as well, getting the biggest name at the deadline on a team that it was really good in the first place. Yeah, they had to get rid of 2 first-round picks and Logan Stankoven, who they liked. But he was a second-round pick, man, and you use that to go and get a special type of player in the NHL, Mikko Rantanen. Yes, you have to pay him a premium, but I think the Stars recognize the opportunity to get a special player like that. And I think even more important, Armando, there were rumors earlier on in the day that Mikko Rantanen wasn't going to sign for $12 million with the Dallas Stars. They said, all right, bet, see how that goes for you in the free agent market. And Mikko Rantanen changed his mind real quick and signed for that $12 million AAV. So I got the Dallas Stars in there as well. My third is not a team. I got Mitch Marner as a winner from the trade deadline with Mikko Rantanen now signed. He's going to be the belle of the ball of the summer. He is going to be the highest paid free agent, the most sought after forward in the entire market. I think it was a good day for Mitch Marner should he wind up to hit that free agent market this summer, because Mikko Rantanen, he's not available anymore.
Yeah, so now he's the big piece for him. And now with the market for him and knowing what he could get on a 7-year deal versus an 8, did the calculation of the total number for Mikko Rantanen. It would have been 13.7 if he wanted to get the whole $96 million for another team outside of Carolina if he were to walk in free agency. And Stankoven is under contract for 1 more year before he becomes an RFA and gets and they Carolina Hurricanes get 2 first-round picks, which we'll mention them later. Also, when I mentioned Colorado, they also got Charlie Coyle, so that's going to be their third-line center for them. So Bruins selling big time here. Let's talk about maybe some losers and maybe guys.
I got some losers
and teams that maybe are like just head scratching. One of them is the Buffalo Sabres. That is one team that you trade away. Yes, they extended Jason Zucker, but you got to pay a higher price for guys to be part of the Buffalo Sabres. They extended Jordan Greenway, but they traded for Josh Norris, a guy who has a big injury history, for Dylan Cousins, who's a real I feel like
reliable.
He's a reliable player, and he's gonna be part of that second line right behind the Timmy Stützle right there for the Ottawa Senators. So I think that the Ottawa Senators are taking that next step with getting Dylan Cousins there. And I think if you're Buffalo, it's like head scratching for them.
No,
so
I absolutely felt the same way with the Buffalo Sabres, man. And it started with the Jordan Greenway deal. $4 million per year for that guy when you're trying to be a rebuilding team. I don't care how much he means to the franchise and what he does. That is a ridiculous overpay for a guy who doesn't produce points, which matters in this game. And then to go and trade Dylan Cousins, who I know has been going through the ringer these last few years, and they gave him that fat contract extension. I believe it's through the end of 2031, right? I knew they were wanting to get rid of him, but it felt like they sold him low for Josh Norris, who, as you alluded to, he has been a good player when healthy, but that's kind of been the knock on him. He hasn't been healthy, and Dylan Cousins has at least been reliable. So, yeah, don't really understand what the Buffalo Sabres did today. Not at all.
Yeah. I had this team as a loser at first, but then they were able to just flip it. The Pittsburgh Penguins originally traded for Luke Schenn, but then were able to flip him to the Winnipeg Jets. So they got a promising player in Tommy Novak, but I still find myself a little underwhelmed with what they did at the deadline. It's just, you got to find a way to continuously get younger, but at the same time, it's just that hunger that Sidney Crosby has to try to win. And Toronto is for me, it's I want to see them play on the ice before I officially judge them. They got Scott Laughton with 50% retained from the Philadelphia Flyers, which doesn't hurt too much of what's going to happen with Mitch Marner and John Tavares. Yeah. Which if Brad Treliving's going to John Tavares, it's like, you want to stay? It's got to be lower. So that's another thing. If John Tavares doesn't resign, okay, fine. Scott Laughton is your 3C. And you could put William Nylander, you could put him back at center if you want.
Yeah, well. And now you're playing a different style of hockey, which honestly might not be the worst thing in the world for the Toronto Maple Leafs, considering the lack of playoff success that they've had these last few years.
Yeah, no doubt. And a few teams that didn't really make a lot of moves here. A few of them are the Flames, the Vancouver Canucks, the Habs for them. Ryan Donato wasn't moved. Brock Besser wasn't moved. Rasmus Ristolainen wasn't moved. David Savard. I believe, was Raquel moved? I need to check.
They tried to move him late, and then it didn't end up happening.
So yeah, there's and Vancouver, you're in a little bit of a crossroads where they traded JT Miller, who might not have been the problem there.
Not the problem.
So, and for Brock Besser, he's going to command a big deal that won't fit for the Vancouver Canucks. So
that's Chicago. Chicago, Brock.
I mean, the Hawks could offer him money, which is, with the cap going up, that could be a situation for the Chicago Blackhawks to really cash in on guys who are looking for. I know you don't win in free agency, and I know they got to pay guys eventually, but with the assets that they have, they're not going to be able to get up. They're going to have to start wheeling and dealing some of those picks, and I think that the Spencer Knight, the pick that they got along with Spencer Knight, I believe that's not going to be an actual pick. I think that's going to be flipped eventually for a player.
I 100% agree. And we've kind of seen Kyle Davidson go that route since taking over as general manager. And the Blackhawks just have so many draft picks. It's now about quality over quantity. So if we have to package a couple of picks together to go and move up in the draft, or trade some draft picks to go and get actual players to start helping this team, I think that's the next step for Kyle Davidson. But I agree, the Vancouver Canucks, to me, were absolutely a loser today. No real decision making whatsoever. You heard their general manager come on the Trade Center show that we were walking, Patrick Alvin, and not really take accountability for anything. They asked him why no deals got done. He said, you should probably ask other teams' general managers. It's like, listen,
Yikes.
You have Brock Besser on an expiring contract. I know you guys are still kind of in a playoff spot, but everyone and their mother knows this team isn't going anywhere. You traded JT Miller. You still don't have really any solutions. You have the Elias Pettersson contract problem, and you didn't really address any of it today. So Vancouver undoubtedly was a loser, along with the Buffalo Sabres for me.
Yeah, so those are teams that we got to see what the long term is for them. But at the same time, the other teams that I mentioned that didn't make any moves, like the Flames and the Habs, those teams are ahead of schedule. And the thing is, I think that those general managers are actually very smart, knowing that they're ahead, but you don't want to get too emotionally invested, and you got to take the emotion out of it and saying, okay, let's give these groups a little bit of a playoff race and let them grow up in this grind as we get down into the 82 game season, even if they don't end up making it. But they are well ahead of schedule, as the Montreal Canadiens extended Jake Evans, and also the Calgary Flames, they did not sell Rasmus Anderson, who I believe is going to be a big part of their blue line going forward. But in segment number 3, we are going to discuss more about looking at the playoff picture and also looking at the draft lottery odds and what are the prospects that could be that Chicago could be looking for down the stretch as we approach the end of the regular season. We're going to discuss that next on this trade deadline special of Locked On Panthers and Locked On Blackhawks. Third and final segment here on this trade deadline special edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast and Locked On Blackhawks. Thank you once again for making Locked On Panthers and Blackhawks your first listen of the day. So I'm just looking at the standings, and at least in the Eastern Conference, where I'm more emotionally invested in, obviously with my team being in it. But man, I'm just compare the East and the West, and I'm just wondering Carolina. Because going into the year, a lot of people said gap year. Yes, Marty Necas was starting off hot and then gets traded for Mikko Rantanen and then gets flipped for 2 first-round picks, which once again, cost control. Tom Dundon has that reputation of being one of the cheapest owners, so he's getting cost control players and two first round picks in order to just still build around their core, but still. Their guys are running out of chances. How many times can you go with this over and over again for Carolina? So I'm just wondering how the Metropolitan Division is the team who gets out of it. I think that that whoever gets out of the Eastern Conference, which I might be cover the Panthers, but I don't see how they're not the favorite in the Eastern Conference with the moves that they made. I know Tampa Bay got stronger as well. Toronto added multiple players, but Washington still has the inexperience around Alexander Ovechkin. Can Logan Thompson give them a long playoff run? Can he? The Connor McMichaels, Alexei Protoses, those are still young players versus the inexperience of the Panthers if they make the Eastern Conference final. But then if it's not the Panthers, then it's the Lightning. If it's not the Lightning, then even Toronto, they've changed their style of play. They look more serious than they have there in the last few years. When their goaltending is healthy with Joseph Woll, who's promising, Anthony Stolarz, which I saw last year. Wow, this the Atlantic Division side of things looks very strong, and whoever comes out of it in the East and makes it to the Eastern Conference Final, they are going to be banged up. And hopefully for the Panthers, like Paul Maurice says, bang their freaking bleak, so that when they get to Game 7, they got nothing left, which is the motto of the Florida Panthers.
Yeah, just looking at the Eastern Conference, Armando, and I don't watch them as regularly as you do. Obviously, being a Florida Panthers host, I'm with the Chicago Blackhawks out in the West. But to me, it just looks clear cut that the Eastern Conference winner to me is coming out of this Atlantic Division. Whether, like you said, it's Florida or it's going to be Tampa or it's going to be Toronto, I just don't really trust anyone in that Metropolitan Division. I think it's Washington's to lose, quite honestly, because with the New Jersey Devils, unfortunately, losing Jack Hughes in a terrible injury, man, for the rest of the season, I think that basically slashes their chances. And I didn't get to mention this in segment 2, but the Carolina Hurricanes, definitely one of my losers today. And I even talked about this with you when we were watching the trade show go down live. Like, they got a fine return for the guys that they traded, but it's an unserious type of move from an organization that should be trying to be contenders right now. It's an unserious move from this franchise to trade Mikko Rantanen after having him for, what was it, 13 days? Something along those lines, maybe a little longer.
It was at least a month.
And it didn't work out maybe it was a month and 13 days I forget. But it's been a whirlwind trade deadline. But anyways, what happened with Jake Gensel last year? Like, you guys are not going to be looked at as a serious superstar market. And guess what? I know hockey's not the NBA. You can still kind of win without a superstar. You still really need one to be at the forefront. And man, the Carolina Hurricanes have flopped 2 fringe superstar type of players in back-to-back years. What star level player is going to want to go sign out there, especially when they have a notoriously cheap owner? Like, absolute joke Carolina has made of themselves in the last month or two.
And looking out west, it's really anybody's game.
Yeah,
I mean,
I love the West.
The Colorado Avalanche and the Dallas Stars could meet in round 1. That is theater. Grab your popcorn. Appointment television if those two were to meet. And Winnipeg, like we mentioned earlier, they didn't do too much to change who they were. But I liked it as well. Luke Shen is a right-handed shot who could be on a third pair. Brandon Tanev, like I've mentioned on my show, he's a shot blocking forward, just like his brother Chris. So that's another thing for Winnipeg, that it's just not. You didn't give up first round picks in order to do that. Vegas Golden Knights, they bring back Riley Smith into the mix for them. So that's another, after making the move for Tomas Hertl last year, they find a way to still complement their lineup on a guy who's familiar with the system over in Vegas. So that's also one thing that's also that I really like from the Vegas Golden Knights.
One thing we should talk about real quick is we thought Vegas was going to steal Brad Marchand at first.
Oh yeah, they tweeted 5 minutes before the deadline, just one word: hi. I'm just like, I don't know what you're up to, but.
And then Jay Fresh Hockey quote tweeted it with the Rats, and I was like, are they really going to do this last minute again? And then 30 seconds later, I pulled up my phone, showed Mondo, Florida Panthers making a move for Brad Marchand.
Still can't believe that. I'm just saying it out loud.
It's crazy.
Is still something that I'm in disbelief of. But really, for
the Western Conference is so interesting, man.
It is, and for the Minnesota Wild perspective, for them, I'm just wondering what the status of Kirill Kaprizov is going to be moving forward, if he's going to play in the playoffs. He was having a Hart Trophy type of season at the very beginning. Philip Gustafson was showing out in the beginning. I mean, this is the last ride for former Blackhawk Marc-Andre Fleury here. So that's another thing for this run. It's just, but at the same time, they got Gustav Nyquist, former who was with the organization before, but it's still struggling with offensive firepower for them. So that's another thing that I'm just wondering. But at the same time, you could flip a coin. Well, it's more than a two-sided coin, but you know where I'm getting that there. But it's really anyone's game over there, which makes it makes it fun to watch.
I didn't hate Minnesota's deadline by any means, but I still like Dallas's and Colorado's more. And that was kind of the thing to me in the Central Division. I know Minnesota has done a really impressive job of holding on to that 3 spot with Kirill Kaprizov being out for so long. And you just mentioned the type of run that he was on to start the season. I mean, incredible stuff. I just feel like the moves that Dallas and Colorado have made now surpasses Minnesota in terms of the Central Division standings. And I know I'm biased as a Central Division host, but I really do believe this division outside of the Atlantic the last few years has been the toughest in hockey. And I really think the winner of the Western Conference is either going to be Colorado, Dallas, or Winnipeg from the Central.
No doubt. Now let's shift over to obviously the Chicago Blackhawks are in sellers mode. This was
the only standings we're looking at, Mondo.
And for right now, according to Tankathon, their chances of getting the number 1 overall pick are at 13.5, right behind the San Jose Sharks. It's funny though. A lot of people are talking about the San Jose Sharks as being this fun hockey team, which I agree with. But then there's going to be those levels of expectations come next year, just like what the Chicago Blackhawks are going through this year. And then people are probably going to change. Oh, fun team. It's like, what's going on with this team?
Yeah.
Nobody's looking at the wins and losses, but it's kind of shifted with Chicago as opposed to last year. Everyone was talking about Chicago, fun up and coming team with superstar Connor Bedard. But now in a position to get the number 1 overall pick again. I mean, I've spoken about Artem Leshonov, how he's going to be coming up very, very soon for the Chicago Blackhawks. Obviously, Bedard's in the mix. Korchinski has been there. Spencer Knight is part of the future. But now they really have an opportunity to get multiple players of multiple superstars of this draft to choose from, like Matthew Schaefer, Michael Misa, James Higgins, Porter Martone, Roger McQueen, to name a few. I know losing stinks, and I know the build is harder. The teardown is the easier part. The build is harder.
Definitely.
But from your perspective, how exciting is this to know that they are going to get someone that's a prized player?
Yeah, it's frustrating at times, especially when, like you just said, the rebuilding back together. It's the hardest part to put together. You think you have pieces, but you still got to wait for them to arrive on the scene. It really does test your patience, but it's definitely an exciting time for the Blackhawks. And even though the losing wasn't something we wanted to go through again this year, as you mentioned, like last year being compared to the Sharks, fun team with no expectations. There weren't Stanley Cup aspirations for this Blackhawks team, but there were some hopes for them to take that next step. Unfortunately, that hasn't happened. A result of that, though, not the worst thing in the world, is we're going to get another high draft pick in this year's draft, hopefully, keeping our fingers crossed that will make a run for number 1. But what's interesting is I don't even know if I want the Blackhawks to get number 1, Armando, because it seems like Matthew Schaefer is kind of the consensus top prospect in this year's class. He's unfortunately been injured since the World Juniors, so we haven't gotten to see him in 2025, but he's kind of cemented himself on top of the others. the Blackhawks have a pretty deep blue line, and I know Matthew Schaefer's a different level of player. Kid's only 17 years old and won't turn 18 until September. But I'm more intrigued by a player like Michael Misa, who has just been lighting up the Ontario Hockey League. At the start of the year, I really thought James Higgins was going to wind up being the number 1 overall pick, but it looks like Michael Misa's even kind of surpassed him in a lot of like draft rankings and mock drafts that we're seeing out there. And Misa, elite goal scorer in the OHL, the only player in the O who has more goals than him is Blackhawks 2023 6th-round pick Nick Lardis, who's trying to become the first player to score 70 since John Tavares in 2007, 2008. So the possibility of having Michael Misa along with Connor Bedard and have those two high goal scoring type of players together, I think he's the most intriguing prospect to me right now at the forward spot. But should the Blackhawks get the number 1 pick, it is going to be really, really intriguing to see if they wind up going with Schaefer, despite them already having a deep blue line with some lefties, like you mentioned, Kevin Korchinski, Alex Vlasic's already on the scene. They still have
extended.
Yeah, they still have Wyatt Kaiser and Ethan Del Mastro as well. Nolan Allen. Those are all left-handed defensemen. Matthew Schaefer is a different category of left-handed defenseman, but he is still a lefty, and they really, really need that next piece along with Connor Bedard. That's why Michael Misa intrigues me.
Yeah, and for the San Jose Sharks deal with them getting Will Smith and Macklin Celebrini, it would make more sense for them to draft a defenseman there. While Michael Misa, who's played in the Memorial Cup as well, that's another thing that also could really help his profile in order to just for the Chicago Blackhawks to go with him. But there's just so many different options. I mean, if Connor Bedard is a winger long term, Michael Misa could maybe ease that pressure off of him, and it's once again a center class that could be very, very strong. And we'll see what happens in the future. I know that when they got Taves and Canes in back-to-back years, they were able to win quickly, but also it's not just, it can't be a carbon copy. It's hard to just have those same expectations.
100%. And listen, I was very blessed as a Chicago Blackhawks fan growing up in the heyday of that franchise. It's what made me love the team and love the sport of hockey so much. So I can't really come up on the show and start whining because I saw 3 Stanley Cups in a 6-year stretch and it was unbelievable. Hoping we can just get back there sooner rather than later and at least make the Stanley Cup playoffs and make me feel some emotions watching hockey again, because the Four Nations was as pumped as I've been for a hockey game since probably 2016, Armando.
Yeah, so hopefully for you, it's they're there sooner than later, and hopefully for the Florida Panthers, they continue winning, get the Atlantic Division, and put themselves once again in a position to repeat as Stanley Cup champions. But that's going to do it for this trade deadline special of Locked On Panthers and Locked On Blackhawks. Jack Bushman, thank you so much for not only joining me on the show, but also visiting me down here in Florida. Tell everybody where they could follow you and your work online, my friend.
Yeah, if you want to find Locked On Blackhawks, you can subscribe on YouTube, or you can check it out for free wherever you may be listening to your podcast. Mondo, really want to thank you, though, man. It wouldn't be possible without you welcoming me into your humble abode for a couple of days. Allowing a kid to live his dream and go and cover a super awesome golf tournament is electric, and I really appreciate you for it. And couldn't have happened in better timing with the Blackhawks and Panthers making a trade with one another. And it was even sweeter watching you live react to acquiring Brad Marchand. So, dude, it's been unbelievable. And who knows, maybe we'll run it back with a live show at the 2026 deadline for the Arnold Palmer Invitational.
Maybe, just maybe. So everyone on the Blackhawks feed, you can follow me on X at MondoMan12. Follow me on Blue Sky as well at MondoMan12, and follow the show account at LO_FLA Panthers on X and Instagram, and on Blue Sky at LOFLA Panthers. So for Armando Velez and Jack Bushman, and you've been listening to both the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast and Locked On Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day.